fascinating conversations is cross-country course design. How many times we walk a course and say, they can't count, or they have obviously not ridden lately because this line is really impossible and all the rest. And here we criticise and criticise and criticise. Probably a lot of us having little idea what a nightmare these poor course designers go through, wondering if what they're producing is to the right level, is going to ask enough questions that it doesn't become a dressage and show dummy competition, but isn't going to finish off anybody. It's an incredibly difficult line to trace, and the higher up the ladder you get, the more difficult it is. 5-star is a really, really hard course to design. And I am fascinated by it because I feel the course designers really need to have ridden themselves. They need to see it all through the eyes of a horse, and they need to have ridden at quite a high level because things are very, very different from 3-star to 5-star. And I think sometimes they forget just what it feels like to ride because it only stays with you a certain amount of time, the feeling of riding. And that's why I like trying to still ride a bit myself, just to remember how difficult it all is. I think we've gone through a phase, and I think we're coming out of it now, of everything should be on the perfect distance. If it's not safe, and we're going to complain. And my response is, you've got to ride what the course designer has designed for you, because that's what Frank Weldon taught us at Badminton. Let me tell you, he put fences up that nobody had ever seen anything like. And we had to go down and work out how to jump them. Every now and again, he imported a fence from another country. The Normandy Bank came from Harry Dupin, 1969 European Championships. Oh my goodness, that was some fence. The ski jump was his own invention. The unfinished bridge came from Horsens in Denmark in the early 80s, the European Championship. So he did have some ideas that he copied, and others were entirely original. Luckington Lane, Vicarage V, which still, when it's at its most potent, is, I believe, the most difficult fence in the world. So it's I was brought up in a Frank Weldon school, which you didn't win at the course designer. In fact, I'll never forget, I was riding a wonderful little thoroughbred horse called Village Gossip, and we were due to take on Badminton, and we still didn't wholly believe in each other. He was very, very fast and very, very strong and very, very brilliant, but I was still struggling with understanding him. And I'll never forget, Mum slid a note under my door on the Friday night, which I read when I woke up on the cross-country morning. She just said, don't forget, it's you and Gossip against Frank Weldon, not against anybody else. And that actually just clicked a switch in my mind. Instead of worrying about not being good enough to take this competition on, I thought, right, Colonel Frank, it's you and me. And I think that's a little bit how it is. It's up to us to find the way to answer the problem that is out there. And it means that we have to have a lot of dexterity trained into our horses. We have to have a canter that can give us lots of options. And that is a certain sort of gear that you practice every few days that you go cantering. You practice different gears in your canter. You practice giving your horse options, uphill, downhill, all the rest. You learn to develop an athlete in your horse, not just in his body, but in his brain too. And he's got to be able to see that fence for long enough to make a decision what he's going to do. And your job is to support him. He has to make that decision. And I think we are coming out of this, it's 4 strides, it's 5 strides. I think once we've got past 3, riders are much more able to say to a horse, I've given you a really good quality of canter, you take me out over whatever distance you want. And as you land in a combination, if you allow yourself to develop your eye, you see whether you should ride out or whether you should sit up and hold with your leg in your hand and help keep him short. You see that. But Chris Bartle was so wise when he was walking a big course not so long ago. He said to me, if you're always deciding that as you land in a fence you've pre-walked 4 strides or 5 strides, you're never going to develop your eye, you're never going to develop your feel for what you should do. Because sometimes you land and you just ride forward and it's 3 to get out. Certain horses, every horse is different. Every horse has a different attitude. Some shrink as they land, some go, and it's up to you to feel and deal. And if you are too dogmatic about the amount of strides there is between each element, you're never going to develop that feel. And I think that those are wise words. The wonderful phrase, riding by the seat of your pants, is so important, but you can do that, and you can do it successfully if you understand quality of canter, which is really what it all comes down to. So I'm really hoping that course designers will pop up, because the old brigade are getting older, and one or two of them are saying they aren't going to go on after they're 70 or whatever the age might be. And there's a huge experience bank in those guys that we need to develop course designers up the ladder now that can take on when they leave off. And it's a brave new world, and us as riders must not be anti the course designers. It's a really difficult job. We've got to encourage and maybe discuss why something didn't feel like it worked. But if I was a course designer, I did try to be once, but I never really got going at it. I was told that we had to retire at 65, and I thought, well, there's not going to be any time for me to get anything done. And nowadays that retirement age has been dismissed. But I do remember thinking, as I was learning to become a course designer, whilst the riders have a very interesting input, you've also got to be able to ignore them, because they are riding the horse they're riding that day with the situation on the problem that it has. And I'll never forget at a particular event called Batsford Park, and I had the Runaway Village Gossip, and we had a sort of Normandy bank type fence to jump, and then we had to turn sharp right after it and jump something else, and it was all in an avenue of trees, and I could only see myself bouncing off the trees and not ever getting the turn, because he was such a goer. And I went to, I think it was Colonel Bill Lithgow, who was our chef de keep as well as the course designer of Batsford, or the technical delegate, and I said, I think that's a really bad fence, because I don't think you'll ever get that turn. And he looked at me and said, okay, thank you, Lucinda. And absolutely nothing was done about the fence, and it was absolutely fine. But I was riding it through the eyes of my horse and giving off my opinion, and it was wrong. Even my horse managed to do it. So you have to be a little careful, because the riders are coming from a place of nervousness, of their particular horse's weakness or failing. But equally, a good course designer has to be incredibly brave. They have to be able to ignore what people say, because there's always going to be negatives. But at the same time, taking on that little bit just to give them the feel of what it feels like riding at that day, because they probably haven't ridden for a few years themselves. It's a very difficult thing, I think, being a course designer, absorbing the feelings, but not absorbing the negativity. You've got to be brave as a course designer. And I know for one, probably one of the bravest riders I've ever met, Ian Stark, he is very nervous on cross-country morning when he's designed a course. He really isn't himself at all. He really cares. And they all really care. So they need massive support and encouragement. And for sure, if we think something is really bad, discuss it. And it may be that we're right, and it may be that we're not right. It's a big job, course design, and we want to encourage it, because our sport really does hang around the neck of a course designer.